So it's recording now. Talk about your life. Start.
Talk about what?
Your life. Just start in the beginning.
Yeah,
Why did you start traveling?
Okay. I think I got the urge to travel from my father. I'm quite sure, because he was a traveler. Yeah. Um, he came to this country when he was 16, but he didn't stay. He left when he was about 18. He left his brothers and he went out west and he worked his way across the United States. And I heard all these stories. And then he volunteered to go to the Philippines. He joined the Army in Colorado, in Denver. And he spent 4 years there. And then he was in France for the World War One, and came back and went to Italy to bring the family, brought his sister, and left her, and then went and worked on the Union Pacific Railroad for going between California and, he lived in California for a year or 2 years, but after he came back from France, I forgot that, before he went to Italy. And backtracking, you're going to get confused. And he worked on the Union Pacific until about 1924, 25. It got kind of tired of it all and decided he wanted to get married. So he came back here, and then he married my mother, and he got married.
How did they meet?
Huh?
How did they meet?
Grandfather Orso was a farmer, and he used to go to the market. And Grandpa had a brother named Jimmy. His real name was Vincenzo, but he was in the market, and they knew each other. So, Uncle Jimmy spoke to him and said, "I have a brother, and he's looking." He knew he had 7, 8 kids. My grandfather Orso, and he said, "I'd like to introduce him to one of your, if you have a daughter." And he said, "Yes, I have a daughter. She was 20 years old." So he went out there and he saw her, and he didn't make much of it, Yeah. But then one day, it was, just he met the family and all that with his brother. One day he was downtown, he was going to work, and my mother was waiting for her mother, and she saw him and she said hello to him. And he began to think over again. He was about 33. There was about 13, 14 years difference between them. So he told his brother, he met her, and he says, "I think I like that girl." And so he started going out to the farm and made a proposal, and they got married. Yeah. He had to wait until the harvest was in because she was working on the farm. So he had to wait until October of 1926 before he was able to get married, because she had to work. Yeah. So I heard all these stories, and I was interested. I used to listen to them, and I decided I had to travel. And the war was on. It was World War II. And I kept thinking, gee, I wish I were old enough I would be able to get a job, with the Red Cross or something and go abroad and all that. And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't wait till the war was over so that I could go abroad. And I remember in 1947, I wanted to go. And people were saying, "Oh, it's so devastated in Europe. You won't be able to go. It's still bad. You got to wait." So finally, 1948, I finished college, and in my class, there was a girl from, her mother was from the Tyrol of Italy that had been under control of Austria before World War One. Yeah, World War One. Her mother was very devoted to her relatives in Italy, and she was Mary. I went to college with Mary, and we knew each other. And she was going abroad, and I told my mother, "This is time for me to go because I can go with them." And so I went. We both booked on the same boat, and we went. It took in those days. It used to take. How many days does it take? It took about 14 days to get to Italy by boat. We went. I remember we were on the Neapolis, New Greece. We were on the Neapolis, and we stopped in the capital, Lisbon, and then we stopped in Genova, and we got off in Genova because we had to go up first to northern Italy to Tyrol, and then we stayed in the I stayed with their relatives for about 4 or 5 days, and then Mary and I began traveling. We went to Venice, then we went to Florence, then to Rome. Now in Rome, I found out we had already arranged it. There was a cousin of my father's who lived there, and we found out because see, my father had a half brother, Gennaro, who had 9 kids, and he was able to make contact with this relative in Rome. So I stayed with these people. My friend Mary and I stayed with these people, and they lived very close to the Vatican. So we stayed there we saw all the sights of Rome. And then she went back up to the north of Italy, and she did some later some traveling to Switzerland and Paris. And I went to Siena and started taking an Italian course. I never spoke Italian when I went to Italy. I had studied it in college, but within 3 weeks I was speaking it because I had the background and I had heard it at home. But the Italian that you heard at home was the dialect Italian. It wasn't the educated Italian that they speak. It's actually Florentine Italian is the national or standard language. So within 3 weeks I was there, and I stayed in Siena about a month, and then I went back. Oh, I went to see my own relatives, all my cousins in Celle, Savia, where my father was born. And that was an interesting little village. It was really something. They had suffered a great deal during the war, and they were so poor. But still, Italy had more food than France. I later went to Paris, and I only stayed about 10 days. I went to Paris, and they had rationing in France, and they had rationing in England. They had shortage of food, but Italy had enough. Well, it wasn't an abundant amount, but there wasn't any rationing. And everywhere you went in Italy at that period, everything was devastated. The railroad stations, the port areas, everything was completely ruined. And the people were so desperately poor that period. I saw, the real ravages of the war. I'll never forget that. Yeah. I was only 20 years old, going on 21. I celebrated my 21st birthday while I was in Italy. And Yeah. Um, I really liked, I really liked it, even though it was poor. And I felt so sorry for my cousins. They were wearing old clothes. The boys, my uncle had 8 boys and 1 girl, and they were wearing old, uh, grown up men's suits that my aunt had sent that belonged to my uncle Louis. He died in 1940. Um, they were very, very poor after the war. Um, so I went back on a boat in November. At the end of November, I was in Italy over 5 months, and I wanted to go back and stay a year um, or longer. So I went back and I was there for about 2.5 years, and I worked and saved money, and then I went back to Italy in 1951, in June of 51. And at that time, I took a course in Florence. I decided the best way to learn Italian perfectly was to take a course, and I studied for 2 months, June, July, actually 3 months, at the University of Florence. And when I finished, they were all students. Now, this Italy it was much better organized than the course that I had taken in Siena. Um, and when I finished, I went to Rome, and I decided I was going to look for a job, see if I could stay in Italy. And within 10 days, I had a job. Yeah.
What were you working at?
Yeah, I was working with United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization. It was a good job. As a stenographer, I had taken when that period after I graduated from college, when I went back for 2.5 years, I had taken shorthand and typing, and I got a job. It was supposed to be a temporary job until December 31st, and I was supposed to fill in when anybody was on vacation or um, traveling or something to their home base. They had moved to Italy right in April of 1951, and I got the job in September. I happened to go down to Rome for a weekend, and I heard somebody say that they were hiring, and I should go and put in my application. So I went and I put in, I can't remember where, it was an American office. And then when I went back to Rome, I was living with a family. And of all things, these people had a telephone. And telephones were rare in Italy in that period. But I had the number on my application. And one night I came home from work, and this was only about 2, 3 weeks after I had begun working. And no, it was it was about a month. And the woman said, "You had a call, and they're going to call you when you come home." I told them you came home after 5. So the guy was an American. He was a Navy guy. It was the 1950 war. The war in Korea had started. So he'd been called back as a reservist. And he asked me, he says, "You have a teaching degree?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Would you come down to Naples?" He says, "We're going to open a school." He said, "And we're trying to get teachers." He says, "We have a few teachers from Germany that are coming down. They're working in Germany now." He says, "And we need more." And so I said, "Okay, I'll come down this weekend." And I went down that way, and they offered me a job teaching 6th grade. And
Can I
so
pause you for a second?
what?
I said just pause for a second. I just want to export.
Huh?
I said we're good. You can continue.
Continue?
Yeah.
Where did I leave off?
The 6th grade teaching.
6th grade teacher.
I began teaching. I went down. I gave a 1 week's notice to what was the name of the company?
Stenographer company.
Food and Agriculture. And I went down, and one of the girls that I had worked for set me up in a pension in Naples, but it was not very nice. But within a couple months, I found a place with an Italian woman, and she had a maid, and I stayed there for 2.5 years. And then when she moved, I had to find another place, but it was only for a few months because I left Naples in, in June of 1954. But anyway, I taught 6th grade, 5th and 6th grade. It was joined when they first came. They didn't have enough kids to make a separate class for about 2 months. Then they hired another. They got more kids. They hired another teacher for the 5th grade, and I had the 6th grade. And we were way out in a suburb of Naples, and we had a school that was belonged to some priests, and it was hilarious. I have some pictures of too. I didn't have scrapbook. It was hilarious. We moved to a classroom that was actually a store on the main street because they didn't have any more room for the 6th and the 7th grade. And we had to whitewash all the windows because all the beggars and everybody would stop by and try to get food and stuff from. And we were constantly being interrupted on that little classroom on the street. And we taught there until, we finished the semester. And I went off to Spain, I think, in France for the summer and came back. We had to teach until July because school began late that first year. When I came back, we moved to another place, and I began teaching 4th grade. I was teaching 4th grade, and this was a much better situation. I taught in a school that they had run it. This was really a school, but it was in a different part of Naples. It was in a more civilized area. There was a lot more people, and it was a completely different community. And I taught there for 2 years. And I remember it was unusual. I lived with that Italian woman that I was telling you about, and she had a maid for 2.5 years. And in the morning, I could go to work on a cable car. It's unusual. And all the places that I have ever taught, I had to use a cable car. First we had a car, and then they said, well, you live on a cable car, it's even faster. And then I used to walk a few blocks to the school. At the end of 3 years, I was in Italy teaching for 3 years. I got kind of tired of it. It was a wonderful place Naples was a wonderful place to go away on weekends. There were all kinds of places nearby that you could visit. Capri, Ischia, all these beautiful places you could go visit. And everything in Italy was cheap in those days, not the way it is now. So I got to, I could go everywhere I wanted on weekends. At the end of 3 years, I decided I wanted to do something different. I wanted to go somewhere else. And I had a student whose mother had lived in Istanbul, and when she was a child. And I talked to her. Oh, I had a friend who went there on vacation, one of the teachers, and she raved about it. She liked it. She went from Greece for 4 or 5 days, and that gave me the idea to go to Istanbul. And so I spoke to her, and her mother came to visit in Naples. And when her mother came, I was invited to go and have dinner with them. And the mother told me about the American College for Girls. And she said, "Right there and see if you can get a teaching job." So I did. I wrote, and the guy was had been there for years, and Robert College. He had been there at Robert College, and he was affiliated with the American College for Girls too. And he said, "Well, if you come here and interview," he said, "and we like your credentials and so forth," he says, "we'll give you a job." So I left Naples, and I was able to get a boat. They had promised me passage back to the United States, but I didn't want to go back to the United States. So I was able to get a boat and go to Istanbul with all my belongings. And I got everything on the boat and went there. And I interviewed for the job, and he offered me a job teaching the children of the professors at Robert College. But I would have had to get an apartment and all that. And I said to him, "No, I don't think I want anything like that." But they had something at the American College, and it was on a separate hill. It was the sister college of Robert College. And I got a job teaching Turkish girls English. And I was able, you had your room and your board and everything. It was all, came with the job. It was much better than having to find an apartment and trying to live on the local economy. And I stayed 1 year. I had a great time, a wonderful time, because I had all these young American kids who had come. I was just a few years older than they. I was about, how old was I? 1954. I was about 27, and some of them was their first college teaching job. They were 22. They were a few years younger. And I was able to mix with American kids, and I had never gone away to college. So it was a great time to enjoy a lot of young people my own age. And I really had a wonderful year. And Istanbul really had a lot to offer because it was Byzantium. It had this ancient civilization, that Christian civilization, before the Turks took over, conquered it, it became Muslim in 1453. And I really got into that. I was terribly interested in it. And all the things that were left from Byzantium. I used to go around and visit all the buildings, the churches and so forth that had become mosques when the Turks took over. I was fascinated with the history, and I had wonderful company, and I made Turkish friends. And I even had a boyfriend, a Turk. He was Armenian. Yeah.
I've heard about this.
Yeah, and I had a great time. It was the best year of my whole experience teaching abroad. But at the end of 1 year, I had been abroad for 4 years, and I knew one of the girls that was the American girls had been to India in the summer for just a few weeks, and she came back and she raved about it. Great, she loved it. And I thought, I got to go to India. So I started out and went, I left Turkey in July of 1950, what was it, 55? Yeah, 55. I was there only 1 year, 54, 55. I really would have stayed another year if I didn't have this tremendous urge to travel, and the fact that I had been abroad for 4 years, and I knew that, I shouldn't linger too long in one place anymore. And so I went to the Greek islands. I didn't want to start traveling in the heat of the summer. I went to the Greek islands and kept going from one Greek island to another. And then in September, I went to Egypt. I started out and went to Egypt and stayed 2-3 weeks in Egypt. And I had never been there before. And then from there to Lebanon. I took a boat to Lebanon, and then to Syria. I did all of the Middle East. We got to Syria. I took a bus from Syria through the desert to Iraq, to Baghdad. It was a special bus. And in Baghdad, I stayed at, I remember, the YWCA, and I met 2 English girls, and they were real wacky. They were younger than I, and they were going to India. And so we joined together, and we decided to go to India. And we got on a bus. We got it cheap, and it was supposed to go to Tehran first, Iran. And we were on that bus for about a day, and then something happened in the middle of the night. It broke down, and they were afraid of that we were going to be raided by some Bedouin Arabs or something. But luckily, we had to stay quiet. But luckily, we got all right. And we saw a bus coming the opposite direction, and we left word that we needed help. And so they sent another bus in the morning, and we got to this little town, not too far from it. And we waited there for a good bus to come. And we finally got to Tehran. We were supposed to get there within 36 hours, but it took us 3-4 days to get there. And then I remember we all stayed together. We met this American guy who was traveling, and so there were 4 of us, the American guy and the 2 English girls and myself. And we stayed and I had a friend who was working with the American embassy in Tehran, and I visited her while I was there. And then the 2 girls wanted to go as fast as possible through northern Iran to Afghanistan and then to India. And I wanted to see a little bit of the southern part of Iran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Persepolis, the historic places. So I left them. And we left very hurriedly without exchanging any addresses, and because we had become very friendly. And I went to the southern part of Iran and stayed for a couple of weeks, and then made my way from southern Iran to Karachi. And I flew the last bit from Kerman to Karachi. That was the second time that I'd ever been in a plane. And when we got to Karachi, then I was able to go up to the northern part of Pakistan and cross into India. And I traveled around in India. And in the springtime, I think it was sometime in March, I happened to be down in the area. I was there from December until March, several months traveling all over. I went across India for the northern part, and then down to Madras, And then I came over to Bombay area, and I went to see the caves of Ellora and Ajanta, beautiful carvings and all that. And I was using the bathroom of this hotel, and you had to share toilets. And all of a sudden, I opened the door, and there were my two friends, Mavis and Barbara, by chance.
Yeah.
And I had already written what?
Okay,
Want me to
guys.
stop?
Pause for a second.
Yeah.
I'm just going to export again. And also, you probably should get some water.
What?
Get some water.
We traveled a lot in Turkey. Well, I shouldn't.
No, I'm recording. Start again.
Now,
Yeah.
we traveled a lot in the interior of Turkey. We used to have a lot of vacations, and I used to take a lot of trips in the Anatolia. I love Turkey. I really do. I think of all the countries. Italy has changed so, and it's become so expensive. But even now, when I was in Istanbul in, what was it, 2011, when I went to Iran again, things were 4 times what they had cost in 2004, the previous time that I was there. And so even Turkey has become, but this guy is Erdogan, he's the prime minister. He wants to become the president. They say he's done a good job running the economy. That's why he's been able to stay in power. But he's so pompous, and he's really a dictator. And a lot of the young people don't like him. I found a lot of people against him when I was there last time.
This is Turkey?
Yeah, in Turkey. And now they're blaming him. And then they found out lately that he is responsible his party is responsible for a lot of corruption. So I hope he loses power, because Turkey, of course, what's happened in Turkey, they never had a very strong government. They've had a lot of turnover, and they have the military taking over a couple times. So it's not a very, but he gave some stability because he brought prosperity. But now it's become very corrupt, and people don't like it because they think he's really a dictator. Yeah. The only ones that really support, see, Turkey is becoming more and more Muslim. I noticed that over the years, because they didn't have the woman wearing scarves. They couldn't wear scarves. Ataturk forbid it. If you went to the university, if you had a government job, you couldn't wear a scarf. But now, this guy he sent his daughters to the United States to be educated, because in America, they could wear headscarves when they went to college. Just look at that. But in Turkey, they weren't allowed. But now I think they've changed the law so that if you want to wear it, he's changed the law, after all these years. Because Ataturk was president in the 1920s and 30s. The law was enforced for many, many years. Yeah. Okay, where did I leave off?
You found your friends in India?
Huh?
You had just found your friends?
Yeah, I found my friends in India, and we were really so happy. I only had about a few weeks with them in the western part of India, in the area around Bombay. But we exchanged, information about people that we knew. And I met some of their friends in the different places where they had been, and they met some of mine. And I went to Japan. I left them and went to Japan. And I went for 2 months. I was there actually for 6 weeks, but then I had to wait for a boat to come back. And I had about 5-6 weeks in Japan. And Japan at that time was coming out of the war. But still, it was better than some of the other countries in Asia, better than the Philippines. The Philippines was very, very poor. I stopped in the Philippines for a couple of days. I wanted to see it because my father had been there. and it was very, very poor compared to. At least people had enough to eat in Japan. It was poor. It didn't look very prosperous, but they, you know, uh, and you could travel very cheaply too, which you can't anymore. Japan is extremely expensive now. The exchange rate was great in those days. And then I went back to Hong Kong and I had to wait 10 days to get a boat to go back. Everything was by boat. I went by boat from Bombay to Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka was called Ceylon in those days. And then from there to Penang, this is when I went out to Japan, and then from there to Singapore. And you stayed all these different places. The boat stopped for a day or two, and you were able to stay. And then I got to Hong Kong, and I had to take another boat to Japan, an American boat, to go to Japan. Coming back, I took the American boat, and then took the P&O boat back. I had to wait 10 days and went back to India. And on the boat, I met a very interesting Indian guy. His name was Shah. It's a very common name. And he had been in Japan with his wife and baby, and he had been interested in paddy field rice cultivation so that he could learn. He went to Japan to learn that so that he could do the same in India and increase the raising of rice. So when I got to Bombay, he invited me to go up to Gujarati. That's the western part of the province of India, to see some of where he's originally from there. He was a Jain too. He wasn't a Hindu. He was a Jain, and so I went up to the area. I remember it was Ahmedabad, and I met some of his friends. Oh, I met some of his friends in Bombay too, and I got to meet some of these people, and they wanted to know about America, and I got to talk to them and make little speeches to people there. And then I left him and went up to Kashmir. I went to see some of the area in the north of India, because I had been all over in the south and in the west and the east, but I hadn't been in all the places in the north. And I went to Kashmir and stayed for a while, and then came down to Amritsar and went into Pakistan, and stayed a few days. And my friends Mavis and Barbara had worked in Afghanistan. When I met them in Bombay, they told me about their experience. They had worked and they liked Afghanistan. So I decided if I could find a place to do something in Afghanistan, I would stay for a while, because they said it was a very interesting place. So when I got to Kabul, I was staying in a hotel. It was called Hotel de Kabul. And the manager happened to be Italian. He had an English wife. And he had moved there to take over the hotel. And he'd been hired by the government to take over the hotel. And Afghanistan in those days was a very backward country, very backward. But there was no war. It was very nice and quiet. The people were friendly, and I really liked it. So I heard this guy say that his wife went to the American embassy because he heard that they needed a typist. They needed person to type. But she wasn't a typist, so she didn't get the job. And so I decided to go and try. And I took the typing test and I passed it. And they offered me a job. And so I was working in one of the offices, personnel. They lacked help there. And they moved me around though. And I worked for 6 months. And I really had a great time there. It was really nice. There were all kinds of Americans and Afghans, but I was very interested in the women's situation because the women were all covered.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I'd run across that, they had what they call shador. They completely covered with just a little latticed aperture see from their eyes, with their eyes, but nothing else. And it was usually a blue or rust-colored burqa. And so I lived at the hotel the whole 6 months that I lived there. And then I decided, well, I better go back to Turkey because I left all my things in Turkey. And so I left. I had quite a bit of material. I still have a lot of it, somewhere on those chairs or somewhere, from about the people and life in Turkey in Afghanistan at that time. And I went from, it was springtime, it was March when I left, and it was a flood, and it was very difficult. I couldn't go up to the northern part, Herat, and cross across Iran to go back to Turkey. So I went to the southern part, and there was a company, Norsen Knudsen construction company, that had in Kandahar, where they have, I guess, what's the name of the Taliban is located there. Morrison Knudsen. I was going to tell you. Oh, if you have to use my bathroom, it's.
You can use the bathroom or you just get food?
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, they gave me a ride to Quetta. I was looking for a ride to Quetta because it was so difficult to travel because of the floods. And I got a ride to Quetta. And in Quetta, there was a train that went once a week from there to the border of Iran and Pakistan. And so I got on that train and at Quetta, and I met this wonderful Australian girl and a lot of missionaries. They were English missionaries on that train too. We were all in one compartment. And it took us 3-4 days to cross from Quetta to Zaidan, to the border of Pakistan in Iran. But that Australian girl became my friend for life. We still are good friends. We've met in different parts of the world, and we correspond to each other occasionally and all that. She's visited my house. I've visited and stayed at her house and all that. Then in Zaidan, we traveled all the way up to Mashhad and then crossed to Tehran together. Leonore, I was with her. And we got to Tehran, and then I decided that I had been in the south of Iran. She wanted to see the places in the south, so we parted, but we were to meet again in London because she was going to London to get a job and stay in England for a while. So, she visited, before she went to London, she stopped in Istanbul and stayed a few days in Istanbul with me. Anyway, I went by across Tehran to Tabriz, to the westernmost city of Iran, and then crossed into Turkey and went by train all the way to Istanbul. And I went back after, how many years was I gone? Over 2 years, I think, yeah. And I stayed in Turkey over 2 months before I went back. From there, in June, I went to Italy by boat, and I stayed 3 months in Europe, and then came back to the United States in September 1957. I had been gone for 6.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good pausing point.
So that was my, I got to use the bathroom.
What's so different about
Oh,
Turkey?
dear. I'm tired. Huh?
So let's see here. You left off. You just returned back to the United States.
Yeah, I
and
came back to the United States. Oh, I had a terrible time. Terrible time. I always tell people, don't stay away too long,
Yeah.
because I was completely lost. Completely lost. I had stayed away too long. I couldn't adjust. It was really awful. I kept going from one place to another. I went from Syracuse down to Washington. I thought I could get a job. And from Washington, I came back. And I got a job and stayed for about 3-4 months. And then in the springtime, I went to California. I decided to go to California. And I kept saying, I'm going abroad again. I'm going to go live abroad again. I couldn't adjust to American life. See, in those days, we didn't have that much money to go back and forth. Today, you could take a cheap flight back.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be so maladjusted when you get back, because you had been there, back occasionally.
Yeah.
But in those days, it was very expensive. You had to come by boat and all that. So I never came back once. Yeah. And I lived in San Francisco for a year. I lived in a guest house, and when I look and see how expensive. Have you been in San Francisco?
No, I've
Yeah.
never been.
I have not, but I've heard they actually have some expensive.
Very expensive. It's one of the most expensive. I don't know how Patty lives
I was
there.
going to say that.
Well, she lives in this. It's the same thing. She works in the city, so she has like the inflated salary from working in the city. It's similar to how the people that work in New York City make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so then they're able to afford the inflated rents, but then it's a cycle.
Yeah, I remember your Uncle Tom said when she went back, a year ago, she had lived there in California for about 15 years till 1995, then moved to New York.
Yeah.
He said, why is she going back to such an expensive place?
Maybe
Anyway, in those days, you could live right. I lived right in the heart of San Francisco, near the Stockton Tunnel, by the famous hotel, St. Francis Hotel, a block away from there. And I only paid $20 a week, and it included breakfast and dinner. It was a guest house.
Yeah.
Now, I was back there in 2010. I stopped to see a friend. I have not been back. I hadn't been in San Francisco since 1968. And I looked at the place, and there's nothing in the downtown area that you would recognize from the 50s. I lived there in 58, 59. There's nothing that you could recognize. It's become a very international city.
Yeah.
And I remember walking around, and everybody was speaking foreign languages.
Yeah.
It's so completely different. It was an American city in the 50s. And I was lucky. I went to work for Kelly Girls, and I met a girl there who was a teacher. And it was the end of August, and she knew I was a teacher. And she said, "Are you interested in a job?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, she says, one of the teachers in our school, seventh grade teacher, did not return, is not going to return. She said, and they need a teacher. This was the last minute. And I said, she said, "Why don't you go out and interview for the job?" So I went and interviewed, and I got a job at the school teaching seventh grade. And I lived in San Francisco 1 year. I decided I was going to go back and do graduate work because a friend of mine had gotten from the University of Michigan, had gotten a master's in linguistics. So I decided I was going to do the same thing. And so I quit at the end of the year. I wasn't that happy with the job. I was in a small district, not with the San Francisco school district, a small district that was separate, and it was by the Cow Palace. You don't know, this is a big arena, they play games there.
Okay.
And I taught there for 1 year, and then went to Michigan, and I was there a year. And I took a course in linguistics and teaching English to foreigners because I thought I was going to go abroad again. But at the 1960, and finally, after 3 years of sticking it out in the United States, I decided I had to stay in the United States. Yeah. And I went back to California. The end of the summer of 1960, I went back to California, and I went to San Francisco, but I couldn't get a job. So I went down to LA and interviewed, and I got a job with California Teachers Association, was interviewing. I got a job teaching in a high school near San Diego. And I taught there for 7 years. It was a nice little town. And I finally, got the foreign stuff out of my mind. I decided I had to stay in the United States, Well, it was my California years were very good. I really enjoyed them. I like California, but it was completely different at that time compared to now. Now it's so different. I went back in the 60s and the 70s, and it's become, I shouldn't say this because it kind of brands me as a racist. It's become very Spanish, very Mexican. It's not the same as it was in the in the 60s. There weren't that many people that were Mexican, and there are lots of Filipinos. I found that, it did become very cosmopolitan, very different than when I had lived there, I stayed in California. It was a very nice period, very quiet, nice period, until my father died in 1967, and then I decided that I'd come back to Syracuse. So that was I was 40 years old at that time. Completely different. I didn't travel for about a period of 13 years. I didn't travel abroad. Oh, I went to Mexico one summer, 63. And I took a Spanish course in one of the cities down there. And I went to Europe in 1964. But outside of that, I didn't travel for, imagine, 13 years.
Doesn't seem like you at all.
Huh?
Why
I
is
said that
that?
doesn't seem like you. Normally I see a one
It's
trip a year.
unusual.
Yeah.
I traveled in the United States going out. And I traveled a lot in California. I was up in the Northwest, and I went up to British Columbia once. But outside of that, I didn't travel anymore. And then in 1970, I came back to Syracuse, and it was very hard for me to live at home anymore. So in 2 years, I decided to take a job in the New York City area, and I lived down in Rockland County for 2 years. I was a librarian. I had changed my line of work. I had taken courses when I was in California, and I got a master's in library. And I lived. I lived in Rockland County for 2 years. And this first year, 1970, I went abroad for the whole summer. And I went back to the places that I had known, the Middle East, India, all those places. And the new place that I went to was Nepal. I had never been there before. I went as far as Nepal and then back to Europe. And I caught the travel bug all over again. I even went to Afghanistan then.
How were they different? How did it change? How did it change from when you had gone there?
What?
How did it change when you went there the first time? Did you see a lot of changes from?
Oh, yeah. Afghanistan was terrible.
Yeah.
Something had happened there in the 60s. It was completely different. It was a wonderful place when I lived there in the 50s, quiet. You could get invitations from people to their homes, everything. When I went back in 1970, I found an undercurrent of trouble. One of the women that I had known, who was a head nurse, and they thought the world of her. The government was against her. She divorced her husband, who was a doctor. I went to her house too for supper once, and she had become. They hated her. They told me, "You go on your own." The government guy, the information guy he said, "You go on your own, but we won't recommend that you see her." They hated her. She had become the mistress of this Babek, the guy who was communist. The Russians had been taking a lot of Afghan boys to Russia and educating them. And when they came back, they were very radicalized.
Yeah.
And they had these groups that had been organized, these different parties. And there was an awful lot of trouble in Afghanistan. You could sense that things were turning bad, something was happening there. The influence of Russia was very, very strong. Well, it was, when I was there in the 50s, there was the United States and Russia. They were both contending for favor from the Afghans. There was a fight between the two of them to get control of the country. But you had the sense that when I saw it in 1970, that the Russians were really very strong there. And the people were so completely different, too. They weren't friendly. There was strong undercurrent of trouble. So I wasn't surprised that the Russians invaded at the end of 1979, yeah. And but I caught fire all over again. I wanted to travel. It was fantastic. That was fantastic. Yeah, and I started going abroad every single summer. When I finished teaching, I was on a plane and out of the country. From 71, I went to Eastern Europe. 72, I went to South America. 73, I went to Africa. I took a plane and went from Egypt all the way down to the south, and then I went over to the western part and saw 4 or 5 countries in the west. Airplane tickets in those days were so reasonable, $1,430. You go to capitals of all these countries, and you could make an itinerary and spend as long as you want. It was so cheap, you know.
Yeah.
I have a ticket that I showed my travel agent. He was floored, you know. I think I paid $1,450 for it. And see, 74, I quit my job and I went abroad, and I went to the area of Southeast Asia that I didn't know, like where I was hurt, Indonesia and all those countries, Thailand, and all those places. What's the other one? Burma, you know, and across. I went around the world actually to India, and then to the Middle East, to Turkey. I always went back to Turkey, and from there to Italy, and then came back. And I was gone about 5 months. And when I came back in August, when did I come? Oh, it came back, I think, in January of 1974. I was out of work, and I can't remember what I did. I got little jobs, and then
Pause you.
stop.
Yeah.
Okay. If I had been smart, I would have gotten the PhD or something, or specialized in that history. Yeah. Because it always interested me. I got a lot of books on Turkey down there. A lot of books.
Oh, my friend Catherine, she'd be so excited to see that.
Yeah.
She would, you know.
Yeah. And
are you recording?
Yeah, the recording started again. So.
What?
I said the recording started again, but just continue it. Yeah.
Can I ask a question though?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Another question. So when you travel to all these places, you know, there are different customs and different things that you have to be aware of when you go. How do you prepare yourself for that? Knowing the different customs and respecting their beliefs and traditions and things like that.
Yeah.
I know that's a
I
very
tried
question,
to read up about the country beforehand, read the history and that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know there's probably certain things that
you know,
I
gotta be. I'm educated, but I've got a lot of prejudices. I do not like the Muslim religion. I despise it.
Oh, they do have a tendency to blow things up.
Huh?
I said they do have a tendency to blow things up.
Yeah. I despise the religion. Because I don't like the way they treat women.
Mm-hmm.
And it really angers me, and it angers me more in this country, to see girls cover their heads, and to see women with their faces covered. Oh, that bothers me. That bothers me.
Yeah.
I see that. I don't know, because I think hair is beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's because it's supposed to be it rouses men, you know. They have to cover their heads. That's ridiculous. Yeah, but I should respect that is a prejudice, and it's a fault of mine. I must admit. It's something I can't admit. Yeah. What?
I said it's not that big a fault.
No?
No. It's completely fine to not like something that's bad.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Stand up for what you believe in.
Yeah.
It's just the reason I asked, because I know, you know, when you go to certain places, there's probably things that you can't say.
Yeah.
Because I remember I've traveled a little bit, and I remember that there's certain topics you have to stay away from, and certain things you can't do, and just wondering how you navigate it.
Like when you travel in some of those Muslim countries, you have to cover your arms. No matter how hot it is, you have to cover your arms. You can't have any flesh showing.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous in the heat. I find I'm not very, Not very good at that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it bothers me.
Yeah.
But I do try to read about the country before I go there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Get a background on it.
Sorry, I kind of deviated you a little bit.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
It's all good.
yeah,
Where-
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, good.
Okay, we left
Where-
off. It was what 1974ish, 75ish, somewhere in there. You said you visited the Southeast Asia area.
Yeah, yeah. I was in the let's see, 74. Yeah, it's from that period. Yeah, uh, I had trouble with employment. The baby boomers came out of college. I mean, college, and they were looking for jobs, and I began to have trouble finding because I had moved around, and that was if you didn't have a stable job, it was really, and I had a hard time finishing my teaching career. I gave up in 1982. I got the time that I needed to get a pension, and I got out. And I traveled mainly from 75 to 82. I was in Europe and South America a lot, Central America, and that area. In 82, I took a trip from, I went to China the first time. I went to China and then Japan.
Actually, can I pause you for a moment? I'm just curious. What was the difference between China then and China now? Because I know they've industrialized really
fantastic,
quickly. Do you have any good stories?
Yeah, they were all in their Mao suits in that period, 1982. There were very few tourists in that period. I organized my own trip. I wrote to a company in Hong Kong, and I got a very good deal. I think it was something like I had 2 weeks with about 6 different cities or areas that I wanted that were my choice. And it cost me, I can't remember now, I have it written down. I can't remember, it was $1,400, $1,400 or something. I can't. That included everything from Hong Kong, not the trip by plane, but it included everything. I can't remember whether it was 1,400 or something like that. It's in my mind. It included everything for 2 weeks with guided tour, food, everything. You can't get a trip today for that amount, you know. And from there, I went to Japan again. It was my second trip. Japan was just stupendous. It was an eye opener. You know, they went downhill in the 90s. Their economy, something happened. They overextended, overinvested. Their banks, somewhat like what happened to us in 2007.
Also, their birth rates declined. So,
but in 1982, Japan was out of this world. They were so prosperous. They were doing extremely well. Everybody wanted to emulate Japan, really. And I had about 12 days in Japan. And then I flew from Niigata to Siberia. I went to Khabarovsk. And from Khabarovsk, I went by 3 days across Siberia. I didn't want to do the whole trip because I thought it was boring. But I got to Lake Baikal in that area, Irkutsk, and I stayed for 4 or 5 days and then flew from there to Moscow, and I went to St. Petersburg.
They were still the Soviet Union.
Yeah, at that time. Oh, I had been to Russia. I forgot to tell you, I was in Russia in 1970 the first time.
So you were in there when it was the Soviet Union? When
Yeah. I was there in 1970, and at that time I was living in the New York area, so I was able to organize a trip. I went on my own. and I had a guide in every city, and I had 3 days with a guided tour, and then I was on my own. Yeah, and it was very cheap. It was only about $300, the land portion of my trip in Russia. And I remember I had St. Petersburg. It was Leningrad in those days. Leningrad, Moscow, and I went to Kiev. I went to where they're having a lot of trouble now. And from there, I went into the Muslim areas. What's the name of it? In the South. They were all, today they're all independent. But
Georgia
at that time,
Kazakhstan.
what's the name of it? I remember names so well, but this one I forgot. The southern, the area is probably the most interesting country. But anyway, I was there, and from there I went into Afghanistan. I flew to Afghanistan. I don't have a map, or I'd show you.
He's looking it up. I
One
think.
second.
He's gonna look it up on his phone.
Yeah, that was 1970, the trip to Russia. But when I went in what was it? When did I go? What was I talking about? Gee, I lost my track.
You were talking about when you went to Russia.
In 74. Yeah, I just did Siberia, and I went to St. Petersburg, Moscow, and I went to another city. I can't remember now. And then from there, I went down to Bulgaria and into Turkey, and then to Italy and back. Yeah, that was 1974. Yeah. So I didn't travel at all from 82 to 85. And then in 85, I went down to South America, and I spent 3 months in South America. And I spent a lot of time in Brazil. I like Brazil. Of all the countries in South America, I think I probably like Brazil better than any of the others. But
what were they like back then? Because I know there's some over there who've like really started to industrialize recently. Were they?
Yeah, Brazil, they say, is an up-and-coming country, and it's, changed completely. But in those days, it's extremely poor. I saw such terrible poverty. I'll never forget. But that was not on that trip, 1985. I think it was later in the Eastern. I was on the Amazon. Was it 85? Was I on the Amazon? I was on the Amazon for 2 weeks or 10 days or something. I took a boat trip from Belém all the way over to one of the big city. I can't remember the name of it. Manaus. And I'll never forget in Belém, a woman bearing her back, showing all these scars on her back for she was begging to get money from people. Terrible poverty. I've never seen anything like it. Yeah. I think that was on the trip in '85. I didn't travel too much in the '80s. I was working. I had studied little jobs, teaching or working. Yeah. And oh, and then I took another big trip in '88. So from '85 to '88, I didn't have any travel. But then in '88, I went. Where did I go? I'm beginning to lose track now.
Okay, it's good that it's getting recorded. So then, if you ever forget, you can listen to it.
Yeah. Where did I go in '88? I could look it up there. I forgot. I got to organize that better. Where did I go? I went back to China. Yes, I went back to China, And this time I did it on my own. I wasn't with an organized tour. Yeah. And it was so completely different. They were all wearing their own clothes, no more Mao suits.
Oh. Okay.
And they had cars, they had different ways of traveling. It wasn't only with bicycles the way they had in 82. I was completely on my own. I went all the way, and I went into Tibet. I saw Tibet for the first time. Very difficult to get to Tibet today. But in those days, I went in 88 and I went later in the 90s too. I've been there twice. 90, I think it was 99, I went into Tibet. But it's very, very expensive now, and they don't want foreigners because they're afraid that foreigners are inciting people. Yeah. But at that time, it was easy for me to go in. I went to Tibet and China. And then what did I? I can't remember that trip too well. I'd have to look it up. You know, all I can remember is that I went to China. Yeah. Yeah. But I'd have to look it up and get the. I keep a travel diary of every trip that I do.
Oh, nice.
And I have a lot of stuff that in each folder that, you know, I pick up stuff, brochures and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Actually, that's a good pausing point.
But I came twice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating country because it was controlled by Russia, and then it was freed in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's become very expensive. I met somebody in one of the recent countries in China, and they said that it's now much more expensive. But when I went in 1998, and I went on my own, and I did. But I had to go to Korea, South Korea. I'll fix those afterwards.
Yeah,
just leave it. Yeah, I'll just leave it. Those are the more recent trips, those two bundles. I separated the early trips from the
Did you need some water?
Yeah, thank you. I don't drink enough water,
Yeah, that's huge. You got to stay hydrated. I tell that to Becky all the time, like, you got to drink like a gallon a day.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I'd like to go when they have the national holiday. They play all kinds of sports, and it's supposed to be quite a time. And I would go at the end of August. I was going to do it this year, but now that I've had this injury, I don't think I'd be able to.
Yeah.
I was going to go to France, and it was the 70th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1944. And I remember writing an article. I was in my last year of high school. We were waiting for D-Day to occur. The Americans and the British were going to invade France. I wrote an article about it, and I've been trying to find that article because it was republished a few years after, and they published it, and they had it. They were showing it in one of the stores. I don't know why. Well, they used to have a habit of putting these high school articles that we wrote in senior English class in the newspaper.
Which newspaper?
On the Post-Standard. And I wanted to find the art, and I can't find it. I've looked in all the Post-Standard. I can't find it. Yeah. But anyway, I was going to go, but now I can't go with this injury. I wouldn't be able to walk. I couldn't walk the other day. How can I go now? I was going to go to D-Day in France, and then go to Paris, and then I was going to go to Versailles, and then down to the the Castle Country in the Loire Valley. I went there in 1964, and I wanted to go back. Um, and and then from there, I was going to take the train for Paris and go to Italy and see my cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find it unusual that I can remember the dates?
I think that it's great that you can remember the dates.
What?
I think it's great that you can remember the
Yeah,
dates.
yeah. People say they can't believe that I can remember all these dates and all that. Isn't it
Yeah.
funny that?
Yeah.
But then others, like place names, I can't. Like the place in southern Russia, some what used to be part of Russia, now a separate country. I can't remember. Yeah, all of a sudden I have a block. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find as an American, did you have more trouble in some of these countries because of that, or?
On the whole, I think I've been treated pretty well as I travel. I think the fact that I was a woman and I was traveling in a time when there weren't that many tourists. You know, in the 50s, nobody had any money.
Yeah.
After the war, there was no money.
Mm-hmm.
People were very poor. Those English girls that I traveled with, you could only take a certain amount of money out with you. See, I had taught in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother used to send me $1,000 in traveler checks every 6 months. And that money would last me for 6 months while I was traveling those 2 years. Yeah. But I was lucky because I had worked abroad and earned pretty good salary. Well, what did I earn? $3,800 teaching the first year in Italy, but still the cost of living. Yeah. I lived in this house, beautiful old house, with this Italian woman for $50 a month, and then I paid her a little for the maid, and food was very cheap. Yeah, you could live very cheaply in Italy in those days. Yeah. And when I lived in Turkey, I didn't get very much of a salary. I got a small salary, but my room and board and everything was paid for. Yeah. Yeah. So we lived in a good time. Today, it's very difficult to travel because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did she leave off? With the 80s, right?
Yeah, you were telling me this was the 88 trip. So what happened just in, what were the trips after that?
Oh, the trip. 89, I went to Europe, England, and to, my friend Mavis died of breast cancer in the I think it was 78 or 79. So when I went back in 89, when I went to London, I always stayed at her house.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were good friends. Yeah. So the people that I met in the 50s were just like soul friends, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
so that was Mavis.
Yeah,
Barbara.
we were young and we stayed friends all the time. Yeah.
So Mavis, Barbara, is there anybody else
What?
you remember from the 50s?
Yeah, I have an Afghan friend who her mother was Russian, and her name is Maga, and she was, her father was Afghan, and they met in St. Petersburg, I think, when he was stationed with the with the Afghan embassy there. And they married, and then they came back to Afghanistan, and she was raised as a Muslim, and she had to wear a scarf. She didn't want to wear a scarf. She didn't want to cover up. And she was ostracized, and she had a very hard life. But she, I met her. It was one of the people that I wanted to meet, and an Austrian lady introduced me to her. And we became very good friends, and we're still friends. She married an Englishman who worked with the United Nations, and she was able to get out of the country. She went to India
Mhm.
And she went on the pretext she had to have medical help.
Mhm.
And when she got there, she married him, and she never went back. Well, she went back as a visitor years later, but she never went. She was able to get out,
Yeah.
and they lived in France for a number of years, and then he they went to England because his health was going downhill, and he died in England. And she's still alive.
Mhm.
She's 2 or 3 years older than I am, but she has very poor health.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's one of the friends from the 50s, and I've seen her several times over the years. And then my Australian friend, she's still, but her health isn't too good either. She's in her 80s. We're all in bad, we're in our 80s now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the one who died, she died in her 40s, Mavis.
Amazing.
Yeah, her friend Barbara, she married when she went back to England, and they broke up. It was very sad.
Yeah.
They had been good friends for 5 years, and then when they went back to England, they broke up. Yeah, yeah.
She broke up with her husband, or she broke off.
Broke
the
up
friendship?
with Mavis, the two of them. They had traveled together for 5 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They were completely different people than the travelers that you have today. They completely different. The travelers today, I think, I don't know. I don't have that much in common with younger people anymore. Yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah.
she got enough material.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I just have a question. Didn't you go to like Antarctica or something once, supposedly?
Oh, you want to see it?
Yes, I want to hear about this. This is the special thing. 'Cause
Yeah.
Not too many people have gone to Antarctica.
What?
He said not too many people have gone to Antarctica.
Antarctica. Oh yeah, I went to Antarctica in 2004.
Yeah.
I thought I better go because I was in South America. I did all the things in South. I went, actually the one that I liked the best was Easter Islands.
The statues.
Yeah, those statues are fantastic. That is really worthwhile trip. Wait a minute, I have something. You want to see the article, but it isn't on Easter Island. Here. This is about the trip that I took in 1983. And this is India. I don't know did you see those articles? They were published in that magazine, 55 Plus. And this, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Yeah.
Okay.
This is about. This one is on the trip that I took to Iran. Yeah. No, Afghanistan. I'll be right back. Yeah, the Afghan trip I went with, they cut it out an awful lot. I went with a group that was called, oh darn it, what's the name of it? I had to pay a lot of money. It was a special group that goes traveling. Oh darn it, what's the name of it? Global Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
They go to all these various places like Cuba and that. But I found a way of going to Cuba on my own.
Yeah.
I got a plane ticket from Syracuse down to Mexico City, and then from Mexico City I flew into Havana. But I didn't have them stamp my passport or anything.
Mm.
I've got about 10 passports too over the years.
Yeah.
The ones that they have today are 10 years, but we used to have them for 4 years ago. And they didn't stamp it. I'm not supposed to say it because you could be fined for going to Cuba. Yeah, I'm not supposed to say it. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Nobody will.
Oh,
No.
I didn't think Cuba is. I wasn't that impressed with it. The food is very boring.
Mm.
I don't think they offered. I was there in 1999. I don't think they offered much of a life to the people.
Mm.
well, the issue was Cuba was getting basically financed by the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
the Soviet
it
Union
was,
fell.
but not anymore. Though.
Exactly. They had to be self-sufficient, but they're tiny little islands. So what are they
Yeah.
going to do? They're going to grow crops and it's going to send them back 50 years.
Yeah, the food was very boring.
Mhm.
And I don't think it offers the people much. If you want to see old cars, Cuba's the place to find old cars. Yeah.
Communism.
So
The only thing that really impressed me, and I thought was very interesting, I went to one of these cities in the interior of Cuba, in the southern, I can't remember, Santiago? Yeah, Santiago, I think it was way over. I took a train and went from Havana to Santiago. I was very interested in the revolution, how Castro got started. And that I found fascinating because it was a disaster. The first time from Santiago, it failed.
Mhm.
And I ought to look up, my memory is kind of hazy. It failed, and he was imprisoned, or he had to flee, and they went into a hospital. All his followers went into a hospital, and they pretended that they were patients, and they caught him. They caught him, and the whole thing. That I thought was interesting. What a failure, and how disastrous it was at the beginning. But then a few years later, he was successful. Yeah. I thought that was interesting from Santiago. We had a good guide, too, who really, told us about it vividly and made it very, very interesting. Yeah.
So I knew you wanted to hear about Antarctica, right?
I want to hear about Antarctica.
What?
He wants to hear about Antarctica for some reason.
I went there without much. I'd have to reread my diary. I went there without too much enthusiasm. The trip was about $2,400. I met someone recently who told me she paid $10,000 for that trip. Yeah, I believe it. I went from South America, from a city in the southern part of Argentina, and I did it on the spur of the moment. I didn't plan it or anything, and they had a boat trip. There were a lot of people from the Midwest, Americans. There were mostly Americans on that trip. Can't remember that much. We used to take a boat every day, a small boat, and go out and see all the different,
Wildlife.
Wildlife and so forth. And I'd have to read my thing. You want me to look it up?
Yeah, it's
2004. Yeah. It wasn't that. I didn't think it was that. Wait a minute. Maybe it's in the. Yeah.
Here?
Yeah. Let me look and see if it's in there.
Careful, it's heavy.
Yeah.
I'll set it down for you.
Yeah. Maybe it's in here. Let me
You look
see.
in that one out.
This is the latest, 209, 213, 12. So it must be, no, wait a minute. It must be in that one, G.I., that small one. Yeah.
09.
It was 2004. What's it say?
9. Kyoto. 02.
Is it 2000?
Of course, it's the one at the bottom. Oh, wait.
We looked for 2004, 2005.
Antarctica.
Yeah, you say Antarctica? Yeah, okay, great. Let me see what the journal says. It doesn't stand out in my mind.
No, there's not much in Antarctica.
Yeah, I wanted to do it because I did a lot of trips in South America, but that Easter Island was the best. Okay.
I just find it interesting that you don't really think of people going to Antarctica
Huh?
very often. Like, you've been on all 7 continents.
Yeah,
It's not many people can say that.
yeah. Okay. Let me see. I should have reviewed it. We went. Yeah, here it is. We went to that area that very few people get to see from when you leave Argentina to Antarctica. Oh, we saw whales.
Oh, okay. I've been to Wales.
Yeah.
No, Wales isn't
Yeah,
an
we
animal.
saw
Oh,
whales.
Wales. Oh,
Wales.
I've been to
Yeah,
Wales.
I went from January 10th.
Oh, so
Yeah,
Wales.
January
Yeah,
10th, 2000.
January in Antarctica is summer, right? So is that,
Depart Antarctica.
it was when it was daytime all the time, right?
Huh?
In January in Antarctica, isn't it always daytime? Doesn't the sun, like, never leave the sky? If I recall correctly? Because it's winter for us.
Light. It's light. Yeah, yeah. Now we're not. I'd have to look at it, Guy.
Okay.
There's so much
Yeah, she
here.
probably wants to
I
review it.
forgotten. It just didn't bring. I didn't have that much enthusiasm to go there, and it didn't stick in my mind as much.
What about, have you ever been to Ireland?
Ireland?
Yeah.
Once.
Once?
I
Okay,
wasn't
I went
that
to
impressed with Ireland either.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, wait a minute. Let me see if I. The one place that I really liked in Antarctica. Oh, we went to Shetland Islands. One place. We had all these islands, yeah. Shetland Island. Oh, Drake Passage. Mhm. There was one place, and I can't remember what they call it. Oh, we went to, no. Drake Passage. We went around the island for 90 minutes. Just we landed on beaches.
Mm-hmm.
I saw all kinds of seals and penguins.
It's neat. You think penguins when you think
The
Antarctica?
Comoras, or whatever they call them. Yeah. I guess I'm not this kind of scenery doesn't interest me that much, yeah.
What is the most beautiful place? If you had to choose one place, and I know it's probably a tough question, what do you think is the most beautiful place?
I don't. Most beautiful place. I've seen so many. It just doesn't.
Yeah, it's
ring a
hard to
bell,
choose
yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd have to think it over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably a tough question because you've been
Yeah,
so
that's
many
a tough-
places
There's so
that
many.
are probably beautiful.
Yeah. I think one of the most unusual places that when I think about it,
Mhm.
is living in Istanbul.
Mhm.
I lived on the European side, and I'd look out my window,
Mhm.
and there was Asia
Yeah.
off of the Bosphorus. That, to me, was unbelievable that
Yeah.
you could find another continent looking out your window.
Yeah.
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 I always remembered that, how fortunate I was to live in such an unusual place.
Yeah.
And okay, we saw seals. I don't know.
So basically, it's wildlife.
Yeah.
Huh?
So basically, you just saw wildlife.
Yeah, a
There's
lot
nothing
of
really
wildlife.
exciting.
Yeah. I'm trying to find that place. It's between when you leave Ushuaia and you go to Antarctica. It's Drake Pass. What the heck's the name of it? It's an unusual area.
There's nothing out there. I can't look it up on my
And
computer.
I don't have even the name of it listed here.
Oh, it can't be that important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Antarctica Lemire Landing? No, that wasn't that. Here we had to climb up snow to see the penguins. Plano and Booth Island. No. On board ship in Antarctica. Donko Island. I can't find the name of the place. Deception Island, Livingston Island, all these different islands.